Hi, I'm Thanks Too Much, and welcome to a three-part series on the Dead Space series. Today we're going to take a look at the first game. We're going to look at what made the first game so unique in the ocean of Resident Evil 4 clones that were so prevalent at the time. Let's take a closer look. It's easy to forget now, but there was a time when the king of the survival horror genre was not Resident Evil or Silent Hill, but a sci-fi horror game first released in 2008 that came out of nowhere called Dead Space. During a time when the Resident Evil series was heading more towards action with its fifth installment, and the Silent Hill series was declining in quality after the fourth game in that series, Dead Space gave survival horror fans a new go-to franchise to quench their thirst for survival horror. But Dead Space had to first prove itself that it deserved to be among the big boys of the genre. Ever since the release of Resident Evil 4, many games have tried and failed to replicate the successful and revolutionary formula that made that game such a classic. When Dead Space was first announced by the now defunct Visceral Games, it looked different enough that people were cautiously optimistic that maybe, just maybe, this game would be different enough to potentially grow into a new successful franchise. But there was still reason for caution before the game's release. Dead Space had a unique survival horror look, and the disgusting yet intriguing nature of its main enemies, the necromorphs, was a breath of fresh air in the usual zombies and typical monsters you get in games. But the game still controlled like a Resident Evil 4 clone. You controlled your character from an over-the-shoulder perspective, and you moved around pretty much the same way Leon Kennedy did in Resident Evil 4. Gamers were so burned out on other games trying to be like Resident Evil 4 that they didn't know whether to be excited for Dead Space. This game could easily fall flat on its ass like so many games did before it. However, one last marketing trick prior to the game's release was the idea of strategic dismemberment to defeat your enemies. The necromorphs don't behave like your typical zombie-like creatures. They have protruding organic blades coming out of what I'm guessing used to be human arms, and shooting them in the body or even head will only make them angrier. You have to completely cut them apart. Cut off their blades, cut off their feet, and cut off any other appendage that is no longer human. The executive producer for Dead Space, Glenn Schofield, said in an interview prior to the game's release, "What Burnout did for crashing, we want Dead Space to do for strategic dismemberment." It's a very good idea on paper, but how does it actually play out? The short answer, everything works really damn well. The long answer explains why everything works so damn well to begin with. The whole game takes place on the USG Ishimura, an enormous futuristic space station that has definitely seen better days. You play as Isaac Clarke, a mostly mute space engineer sent to the Ishimura along with a small squad to fix the space station's communication problems and to find out what happened to his girlfriend Nicole after she sends him a rather cryptic message for help. In Dead Space's version of the future, humanity has figured out not only how to discover new planets many light years away from Earth, but also how to mine them and strip them of their natural resources. So-called planet cracking is what the game calls it, and the USG Ishimura is the biggest planet cracker of them all. You enter the Ishimura after a rather rough landing, and you quickly realize that things are really off. For a space station that's supposed to have over 1,000 people on board, it's eerily empty at first. No one is home, and you're just some random engineer trying to figure out what the heck is going on. You're not a space marine like in Doom or Halo. You're just some random, regular, futuristic Joe Schmo engineer that can crack open tough rocks along with doing some communications repair here and there. This fact is really driven hard when the shit finally hits the fan and the necromorphs start killing your squad. In this video footage, I'm wearing the soldier suit you unlock when completing the game. But in your first playthrough, you are equipped with the most basic engineer suit and you have no weapons. So when the necromorphs appear, you have no choice but to run, which makes for one hell of a first impression. Eventually, you do get weapons, and here is another piece of Dead Space's creative genius. Your weapons are actually tools that someone like Isaac would use in this futuristic setting that Dead Space creates. They're very powerful and very destructive tools, but they're tools nonetheless. Setting up the fact that in this future, cracking open planets for their minerals has become a lucrative business venture makes it easy to believe why people would need tools that shoot out things like powerful pieces of plasma. I mean, all you need to do is see how we treat our planet in the real world today. And it isn't a far-fetched idea that once we achieve light-speed travel, we'll use it to drain other planets of their resources once we drain our own. But I'm getting off topic. Isaac's tools and equipment make him feel like a normal person, which is saying a lot considering the fact that he never talks. Isaac is someone who is completely ill-prepared for the situation he finds himself in, so he needs to improvise with whatever he's got as an engineer or face being torn apart by the necromorphs. Luckily, tools meant to cut through tough rock are very effective at cutting up flesh, and I appreciate the nod to real life this has. I mean, seriously, go to your garage or toolbox right now and you'll find things like hammers, axes, boards with nails, and maybe even machetes depending on where you live. These things are useful tools that can easily be turned into weapons, and it's this idea that grounds Dead Space into reality even in this futuristic sci-fi universe. Even when you upgrade your weapons and suit to have more damage and defense stats, Isaac Clarke still feels like an ordinary guy in an extraordinary situation. Dead Space does take inspiration from other games in media, but unlike many Resident Evil 4 clones before it, Dead Space does a good job of borrowing ideas while creating its own identity. Isaac Clarke does control like Leon Kennedy from Resident Evil 4, but Dead Space goes an extra step to immerse you in its terrifying but intriguing setting. To start off, you have no HUD. Everything you need to know about Isaac is either on his suit or his equipment. Having no HUD while still relaying to the player all the information they need to know is a lot harder than people realize. The player needs to know how much health you have, how much ammo you've got, when you can use your suit's futuristic abilities, and even how much air you have left when you're forced into the void of space in some sections of the game. All this information is relayed to the player flawlessly, thanks to creative thinking, such as a tube running down Isaac's spine that shows how much health he has left. The lack of a HUD really helps immerse you in the unique and dreary conditions of the Ishimura. Even before the events of the game, you learn through video, audio, and text logs of the daily grind and boredom that people suffered on the Ishimura before they all turned into necromorphs. The more you explore the Ishimura, the more you see the details of what used to be everyday life on a huge spaceship. You come across audio logs of people complaining about constant ship malfunctions on the Ishimura and how things like power outages are a constant burden. There are anti-gravity sections that were once used solely to pass the time. Anti-gravity could be used for much needed relaxation or to play a sort of anti-gravity version of basketball/volleyball. You see many billboards and signs that look like they were ripped off straight out of the Soviet Union. I mean, seriously, they might as well say, "The Ishimura is for you, my friend. We must all work together. Remember, we need you." This kind of propaganda was used in real-life history to hide darker, more sinister secrets, and Dead Space takes this inspiration and runs with it, which is something I'll get to in a bit. But my point here is that the Ishimura is a shitty place to work and live, and then everyone gets killed and turned into mindless monsters. Any survivors you find have completely lost their minds, and some have been so traumatized by the horrors they've seen that you start to think that maybe death isn't the worst outcome in a ship infested by monsters. There's this one moment in particular towards the middle portion of the game that really sticks with me. You're in the medical deck of the Ishimura, and all of a sudden there's this woman, just standing there, next to the bodies and blood-smeared walls of the medical deck. All she makes is this noise, which is a mixture of laughter and cries, and it's both heart-wrenching, unsettling, and very sad. There have been some that have compared the setting of the Ishimura with Rapture from BioShock, but I honestly don't see the comparison. It's not as open as Rapture, and even the type of horror both games were pursuing is different. If anything, it has more in common with the Alien franchise, specifically the first Alien. Alien was a great movie for me, mainly because, at least back then, the xenomorph was a manifestation of the fear of the unknown, since you didn't know what the hell the huge black alien was. Though you do get somewhat of an answer of where the necromorphs come from by the end of the game, when you first start out, you have no idea what the hell is going on, which exacerbates the scares in this game. You have a run option, but I almost never used it during my first playthrough because I never knew what was waiting for me on the next corner. That's not even mentioning the use of flighting in this game, which again copies the Alien franchise, but at least here the Ishimura is a unique enough place that you don't really mind, and it's not like other games or even movies haven't copied what the first two Alien movies did. At least here, there is a successful effort to create something new out of something similar. But Dead Space is more than just a refreshing take on survival horror. There is a brilliantly subtle yet strong message about the dangers of extreme and blind belief in this game. Now, before I go any further, please do not misunderstand me. While Dead Space does use a fictional religion to make its point on extreme belief, the critique is not about religion. It just uses a fictional religion to get its point across. We clear? Okay. In the universe of Dead Space, Unitology has become a sort of new and ever-popular religion. Similar to real-life religions that boast megachurches and leaders that preach about giving and charity while they themselves live in mansions and have millions of dollars in the bank, Unitology has its powerful leaders. In fact, the reason the Ishimura was cracking its current planet was to see if they could find an artifact called the Marker, which is apparently a holy symbol to Unitologists. It's brought on board the ship, and before long, people are going crazy and necromorphs appear left and right. Unbeknownst to the crew of the Ishimura, the Marker makes people hallucinate and go mad, which is a clever way to explain why Isaac himself hears voices and weird sounds in the background to drive home the point that maybe he's losing it. There is a decent amount of history about Unitology if you take the time to hear and read logs you pick up along the way. You'll even meet characters who have completely lost themselves to the idea of Unitology. Unitologists believe that, for some sick reason, the necromorphs are the next step in God's plan for humanity. That you have to die in order to be reborn, and if you don't believe in this rebirth, you have no choice in the matter. It will be forced upon you. Along the journey, you'll bump into a guy called Dr. Charles Mercer, and Mercer isn't too happy with the idea of your survival. At first, he seems to be the main antagonist, but by the time I finished the game and reflected upon it, Dr. Mercer was really just a brilliant scientist who trusted completely and blindly in the faith of Unitology. I mean, the guy is smart. After all, this is the guy who unleashes the Ubermorph on you, a necromorph basically on steroids who can regenerate its limbs so you can't kill it by conventional means. But his faith makes him lose his goddamn mind. He really believes he is doing humanity a service by turning people into these necromorphs, and in the end, he does practice what he preaches as he allows himself to be, quote-unquote, converted into one of the necromorphs he loves so much. But the scarier part is that Dr. Mercer was by no means the only one who believed blindly in the faith of Unitology. Many of the crew, including the captain of the ship, believe that Unitology and its symbols, like the Marker, are holy and should be followed without question. Anyone who can't see the faith of Unitology will either be forced to believe or be treated as a means to an end. It was this type of thinking that led to the infection of the Ishimura and the deaths of hundreds of people. This is an exaggerated example to be sure, but it's not without its warning about how people lose themselves with extreme beliefs in the real world, especially with religion. And poor Isaac falls victim to the carelessness of the extreme belief of Unitology. You do find Nicole and the Ishimura, but the encounters are always a little off. It's not until the end of the game that it is revealed that Nicole was dead even before Isaac made it to the Ishimura, and what you were seeing was a hallucination by the Marker, which is alive or at least sentient in some way. The final scene of the game shows Isaac's beat-up face and one last jump scare of a deformed Nicole leaping at Isaac. A very predictable ending to an otherwise unique and fantastic game. Dead Space was a hit, which meant a new franchise was born. Dead Space got people talking about horror again, and those who played were eagerly waiting for more. People would have to wait a little over 2 years before the much anticipated sequel would arrive, but Visceral Games would give Dead Space fans much to look forward to in the meantime. There was a fairly enjoyable cartoon movie called Dead Space Downfall, which acted as an animated prequel to the first game, and another animated movie called Dead Space Aftermath, which wasn't as well received as the first cartoon, but acted as a prequel to Dead Space 2, by setting up characters we would later see in that game. However, Dead Space Extraction was the real treat for fans, while Visceral Games were hard at work with the sequel. In a way, Dead Space Extraction is like a thank you letter from Visceral Games to the people who played the first Dead Space and made it the mega hit it became, which is quite the accomplishment when you consider how many survival horror games tried but ultimately failed to do the same thing. Dead Space Extraction was released on the Wii in 2009, a year after the main game, and unlike its predecessor, it's not a survival horror game. It's an on-rail shooter that also acts as a prequel to the first game. But even though this isn't a survival horror game, it still feels like a Dead Space game. It would have been easy for Visceral Games to just make a run-in-the-mill on-rail shooter and just slap the Dead Space title on top, but an admirable amount of effort was put into Dead Space Extraction. First, the story gives more information to what the hell happened to the people on the planet of Aegis 7 and how the Ishimura eventually got infected with necromorphs. You actually get to experience the discovery of the marker, and in a clever form of storytelling, you start where the first game ended on the planet of Aegis 7 and work your way up to the Ishimura. You also don't know who is going to live or die, as the first character you play as gets killed while going on a murdering spree caused by a hallucination from the marker. This gives the player some of the tension felt in the first game, since, as an on-rail shooter, you don't have control over your movement, which means you have no say on where the story takes you. You're along for the ride as you shoot at necromorphs the same way you did in the first game. And that's okay. Really, the lack of control could have taken off the enjoyment felt in the first game, but the story and gameplay are done well enough that you don't mind letting Dead Space take the wheel for this game. You still use the strategic dismemberment technique, and it works surprisingly well for an on-rail shooter. Extraction also gives the player the opportunity of experiencing hallucinations that characters go through due to the marker from the first-person perspective. It would eventually be done better in Dead Space 2, but for now, the many what the fuck moments that Extraction gives the player are more effective because you are seeing them from the character's own eyes. You also get a little more history of what Unitology really is through text logs and bonus videos given to you when you beat certain levels. The videos themselves are simplistic in quality and story. They're basically comic book panels with decent voice acting that also tell the story of how Aegis 7 and the Ishimura got infected by necromorphs. The videos are fine, even if they start with the whole cliched beginning of, "If you're listening to this, you're already fucked." But they do give more backstory to the history and shadiness of Unitology. Surprise, surprise, evil corporate bigwigs who are Unitologists are experimenting on the people of Aegis 7 to confirm their beliefs on the marker and the necromorphs. Nothing new here, but Extraction as a whole is still an enjoyable experience with some great foreshadowing for future games in the franchise and a nice appetizer until the main course. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Be on the lookout for next time when we look at Dead Space 2 and its DLC and see how Dead Space 2 maintained the dominance that Dead Space had in the survival horror genre, even if that time was a little limited. Please share this video with your friends as well. I could always use some new fans. I'll see you all real soon.
Shut up, I'm trying to think!
P-Sec, what's going on here?